Hello writer, and welcome back to my life. It's Writer Wednesday, where I give you my best tips and advice on the art and the business of writing and tell you how I do what I do as an indie author. Today we're answering a question from my $5 patron Ryan Starbloke, who asked me to talk about the current state of serialized fiction. So serialized fiction has been a big topic in the indie author community since before I entered into it, with the blokes at the self-publishing podcast specializing in serialized fiction for a good long while. Books were treated like TV seasons, being split up into multiple episodes, which were published on a weekly basis or every other week, and then all published together as a single volume of the full season. Even back then, though, there were two big issues with serialized fiction: production and earnings. On the production side of things, it's a lot of work to produce even 10,000 words every single week, and most serialized fiction tried to be slightly longer. Even the biggest and best writers of serialized fiction often struggled to meet deadlines. One of the solutions that serial authors came up with was co-writing. If you're sharing the production burden, you theoretically only have to do half the work, making it easier to keep cranking out those words. And of course, collaboration offers a bunch of other benefits, such as having someone to help you work through writer's block. I've talked a lot about how much easier it is to keep going on your writing journey when you're not walking the path alone. The other obvious and popular solution to production issues is to give yourself time between your seasons. If you release 6 episodes of a book in 6 weeks and then the single volume, you'd give yourself a month or two before you started releasing episodes of the next season. This gives you more time for pre-production and allows you to bank a few episodes of the story before you start releasing it. And since this is how actual TV shows work, which is the modern framework by which authors usually explain serialized fiction to readers, it was an easy sell to your audience. Thanks for reading season 1. Season 2 will start releasing in 3 months. People got that. However, dealing with production issues didn't necessarily address payment issues, which is the other part of the process where serialized fiction can be a problem for authors. Because of the nature of serialized fiction, with episodes usually being between 10 and 20,000 words, the default price per episode was 99 cents. And of course, when you publish on virtually all of the ebook platforms, a 99-cent ebook means you're only earning 35% of royalties instead of the usual 70%. So for the same amount of work, you were earning only half the money, which made it hard to turn serialization into a sustainable business practice. Some authors dealt with this by only publishing their serialized fiction in the full seasons, i.e. in the multiple episode compilations that they would normally have published after the episodes came out individually. The problem, though, is that this kind of defeats the purpose of serialization in the first place. The main reason you would serialize a story is to create that week-to-week feeling people get when they watch event television, increasing their anticipation for each episode and letting them all read each episode at the same time. That allows for weekly audience discussion of each episode and lets your readers guess what's going to happen next, and all of that vanishes when you release your serialized fiction in complete seasons. Some indies thought they were still creating a good serialized experience because in their complete volumes there were the episode ends that were fantastic cliffhangers that dragged the readers into the next episode. But the same thing can be and is achieved just by structuring your chapters correctly. The end of each chapter should pull the reader into the next chapter, whether it's the end of an episode or not. Serial authors were trying to work along the lines of the Netflix binge model. Now, of course, Netflix has been extremely successful with that model, but that's because their entire business and corporate philosophy is built around. They have a captive audience who are already paying a subscription fee. They don't need to have weekly releases to pull in viewers. They just need to create a vast library of content to make their subscription fee as valuable as possible. Indie authors often talked about duplicating the Netflix model with their work, but they misunderstood the Netflix model as producing binge content, when in fact the Netflix model is have so much content for so cheap that everyone in the world wants to give you money. And that model is just not something an indie author or even a pair of indie authors can recreate with their work. So eventually most indies drifted away from serialized fiction. Almost none of my books are available in serialized form anymore. The last books I released in serial fashion were Nightblade, Mystic, and Darkfire, the first 3 books of Underrealm, and those have now been reformatted and repackaged to be novels, with no episode breaks in the books, and the episodes I originally released are no longer available. Now, all this being said, I think there is still a way to produce serialized fiction and make money at it. In fact, there are several ways, much more than there were when I first started doing it. The first is to take advantage of Kindle Unlimited. If you create a serialized story and market the heck out of it specifically to Kindle Unlimited readers, you could theoretically get yourself a whole lot of reads. And Kindle Unlimited doesn't care about the length or price of your book. You earn the same amount of money for every page read, whether you price your episode at 99 cents or $2.99. And Kobo has a similar subscription service now, although as per usual, they don't have an audience the size of the Kindle Unlimited audience, so you have to make a judgment call there. The other option to make serialized fiction work is to go through a site like Patreon. On Patreon, you can create your own subscriber base, an audience of people who will pay you every time you release a new story. And on Patreon, you can charge them $1 per episode and still get high royalty rates. In fact, even higher than the 70% that Amazon offers for their preferred price range. The problem, of course, is that you have to generate your own audience. Yes, there are a lot of people on Patreon already, but it is absolutely not a discovery and marketing platform. It is strictly a support platform. So you have to find an audience and get them to Patreon to support you. And it can be very hard to generate that audience without having content to attract them. So it's a bit of a catch-22. Here's what I would do if I were starting serialized fiction right now. And in fact, this is the business model we use on the Chronicles of Underrealm, which is not a serialized fiction project, but it is a weekly release project of short fiction, the only difference being that the stories aren't narratively linked. I would produce my stories on both Patreon and Kindle Unlimited. I would start off by getting as many patrons as I could just on the strength of the story idea I was pitching. I would then release the first episode on Patreon where my supporters would pay me for it, and I would then publish the ebook on Kindle Unlimited. Yes, in Kindle Unlimited you're not allowed to sell on other platforms, but that's not what you're doing. You'd be selling it to your patrons only upon release, and it wouldn't be available on Patreon again after that. It would only be on Kindle Unlimited. So every episode is released to your patrons before it becomes available for sale on Amazon. And to make this sort of model work, you have to include links in the back of the book that point Amazon readers to your Patreon. Because as you start to accumulate more and more audience to your series, you want to drive as many of them as possible to your Patreon to support you as each episode releases. Because then they're your audience. You can reach out to them. You can contact them. You have their email addresses. As with everything in the indie author business, you want to have as much control as possible. You don't want to rely on Kindle Unlimited to promote you to your audience or earn you money. You want to have a direct line to your readers. This kind of business model, if you could keep up with the production, would be pretty awesome because you would have monthly income from Amazon, where you would probably make the most money in the long run, but you'd also know exactly how much you were making on Patreon in advance. That level of predictability of income is extremely nice and comforting, trust me, and even more so when you're first starting out. Even if you're not earning a lot of money at first, knowing how much money you will make can do a lot to ease your mind. And that's all I've got for you today, writer. Thank you to Ryan for this question. I hope you and others found the answer helpful. A reminder to everyone else that my $5 patrons like Ryan get these videos 2 weeks ahead of everyone else, and they're the only ones who can request topics for me to cover in future videos. Do you want to be one of those awesome and incredibly attractive people? I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!